clinician, because those are really not appropriate for self-care. So when it comes to herbs, unfortunately, a lot of people always want a simple answer. They're used to this pill for this disease. Herbs don't work well that way. You can use them that way, but they don't work well that way. And so it gets more complicated. So I would encourage people, number one, to educate yourself. Just like you wouldn't go into a pharmacy and just pick something off the shelf and pop it in your mouth, you need to have some knowledge. The food herbs, again, are for the most part safe, benign. The medicine herbs, whether we're talking about a black cohosh or we're talking about, um, uh, something like, just off the top of my head, myrrh or something of that nature, these need to be used with more knowledge. And usually they're taken for a specific period of time for a specific reason, and then you stop taking them. They're not tonics. You don't just take them every day because they're good for you. And of course, those poisons I mentioned earlier, people shouldn't be taking those at all. There's only are used under the guidance of a clinician who understands how to use them, understands their toxicology. So I think educating oneself is really important. And this is something I said in my class the other day. And it can feel daunting. It's like, well, I don't know where to start. And yes, finding a good clinician, whether they are an MD with training, whether they're a naturopathic physician, whether they're a clinical herbalist, a acupuncturist who practices Chinese herbal medicine, that is always important if somebody has a more serious illness. But if you're going to use herbs on your own, start reading about them. And I would be, just say, a bit discerning. There's a lot of information out there. Not all of it is good. So stick with things that are written by people who have credentials, who've been doing this a long time, and read about it. If you have a garden, even if you have a deck out back, start growing some herbs. You can grow basil. Not only can you make pesto from it, but it also enhances digestion. You can start growing lemon balm, and not only can you make tea out of it, but it is a mild mood elevator. Who couldn't use these days a mild mood elevator? And so we have lots of things that people can gradually learn. You learn a bit about this one, you experiment with it, you practice with it, and then you move on. And so you don't need to know everything. Again, especially for self-limiting conditions or these food herbs, you just start working with them. And that will include things like, again, ginger and cinnamon and chamomile and hawthorn and lemon balm and peppermint and spearmint. For the most part, these herbs are safe, they are mild, and they are effective.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. What are some common sources of chemical exposure in our homes, and what safer alternatives can we use?
Yeah, so first of all, we can make our own with very simple ingredients. Again, I put together do-it-yourself ingredients, but really just sharing now, it's just basically white vinegar and Castile soap and, coarse kosher sea salt is very coarse for scrubbing. Lemon juice. I mean, there's lots we could do with very, very simple ingredients. That's cleaning. If you're talking about disinfecting, which we saw an enormous number of harmful chemicals hit the market after COVID, those have quaternary, toxic chemicals. There's so many antimicrobials that we've been marketed to believe we need. We don't need to be antimicrobial. In fact, we live very well with very, healthy microbes on our skin and in our body. We don't want to be surrounded by antimicrobials also or antibacterial substances, because it also increases our drug resistance when we actually need an antibiotic, for hip surgery or prophylactic, or even when you actually have an active infection. So when I think about cleaning products, I think let's go back to basics. Let's think about what our grandparents used before this influx of crazy number of chemicals: a door cleaner, a sink cleaner, a window cleaner, a surface cleaner, carpet cleaner. It's crazy. All we really need is one or two cleaners at most that can serve every part of our lives in every aspect of our lives. Then I also really encourage is if you're not going to make your own, which people are busy, I'm busy too. I don't make them anymore. You can really just look up certain very well vetted resources, which again, I have these things options in the book because I want people to know you don't have to be Martha Stewart. You don't have to be a toxicologist. You really just need the right resources if you're going to purchase, cleaning products that you don't want to make, or you can make them yourself with very, simple ingredients. And I think that that's really the message across the board is sources matter, vetted sources matter. You want to make sure that you're not going to TikTok or some of these other, areas where people are getting a lot of information, I think that can harm them, including my kids, right? But the idea is that you really need to be thinking about who is the messenger and what are your vetted resources, just like David was saying too. You really need people that have done the work and really thought about these issues, in a very reasonable and holistic way, in terms of risk benefit ratios. So that's kind of where I stand with that. I noticed there was a couple messages about bottled water that I don't know if you wanted me to address a couple of these interesting questions.
I guess we'll pass on those for now.
Okay, gotcha. So that was my answer then.
Okay. And are there any specific companies that you could tell us or websites that have cleaning products that make it for us?
Yeah, sure. So I don't endorse brands or sell anything, and that's part of all of my work because I get into schools and in programs, and that really means something to me in terms of being a clear, unbiased voice. But I do rely on colleagues that do this work and do it well. Environmental Working Group does a really nice job of vetting out cleaning products. You just go to their websites free. You can even use their app called Healthy Living, which is free. My son actually is really quite adept at going through and looking at cosmetics and personal care products as a teenager and choosing the best choices. And he's taught his friends how to do it. It takes no time at all. And then there's Clearia is another great resource. Yucca is another app that's a great source. Think Dirty. And of course, I've listed these in the book, but I want people to just to know that they're pulling from a lot of the same data, which is great because they're pulling from national databases in terms of, EPA and actually well-referenced studies. So they tend to have a lot of the same recommendations in general.
Okay, thank you. David, what is your thought on if someone is told they need an antibiotic? Someone says, take doxycycline, you've been bit by a tick, or someone says you need an antibiotic for some kind of infection. Do you say to them, yes, go ahead and take the antibiotic? Or do you say to them, there is an alternative approach, there are some very strong herbs that are as effective? What is your thought on some replacement for an antibiotic?
So you get bit by a deer tick and you develop the bullseye rash, which only happens about 40% of the time. Or the other real common symptom pattern you tend to see is the person gets a stiff neck, a headache that won't go away, and crushing fatigue. And don't call the herbalist. Do not call your chiropractor. Don't call your Reiki healer. Call your doctor. Ask them for a 3 to 4 week prescription for doxycycline and take it. Why? Because you have to understand there are areas where herbal medicine is really strong. And those areas tend to be where orthodox medicine is not so effective. But the obverse is true. Where orthodox medicine is really effective is where herbal medicine is less effective. So it's not one or the other. It's what's most appropriate for this person at this time and in this specific situation. So with something like Lyme disease, and I've had Lyme disease 9 times. It's not the record, but it's up there. It's sort of an occupational hazard as an herbalist, and I tend to be careful, but still, I have treated people with Lyme disease who a year prior were healthy athlete, cheerleader in high school, and a year later they're in a wheelchair. This is not something to fool around with. And so when you're having somebody with Lyme disease or bacterial meningitis or things like that, antibiotics are the treatment. Don't fool around with trying to find herbs. There are no herbs that work the way an antibiotic works. There are herbs that are called antibiotics, meaning that they inhibit bacteria, but they do not work the way an antibiotic works. All right. So we're actually using the same term for two different phenomenon. So yes, are there herbs that I take to, for instance, prevent upper respiratory tract infections? Yeah, my favorite one is a Ayurvedic herb called Angiographis's. I travel a lot, and so I'm always on planes, and no matter when I'm on a plane, it always seems the person next to me or behind me is coughing, sneezing, whatever. And I'm not a big fan of getting sick, especially if I'm traveling and need to teach or talk. So I take Angiographis's, and I virtually never get sick. And it's not that my immune system is that fantastic. It's because Angiographis's is really effective. So the thing is that it's what is appropriate in a given situation. And as an herbalist, I don't work with pharmaceuticals. And so I would tell you right off the bat, if I have a patient comes to me who says to me, I'm taking Synthroid, I'm taking levothyroxine, and because they have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a autoimmune disease that causes a hypothyroid condition, and I get this question all the time. I don't want to take this anymore. I want herbs. Well, first off, as an herbalist, it's not my place to take somebody off any medication that a physician has prescribed. That's a really good way of getting yourself into trouble. So don't do that. If they want to go off the medication, they need to talk to their doctor, and the doctor can walk them through it and decide whether they're going to go off it, depending on the medication. Like if you're talking about like an antidepressant, like an SSRI, sometimes you have to wean off those medications very, very slowly. So anyway, there are times when herbs, if I have somebody again with Hashimoto's thyroiditis and they have early stage Hashimoto's, to mild Hashimoto's, herbs can be used there very effectively. So you don't need to go on something like a Synthroid. On the other hand, you have somebody with a moderate to severe hypothyroidism, herbs aren't going to work. They're not going to be strong enough. And so it really comes down to what is appropriate in a given situation. And as I said earlier, herbal medicine and orthodox medicine working together is an incredible win-win for the patient because no one has all the answers. But here's two areas of research and knowledge that don't have exactly the same answers. And so they work incredibly well as what people call complementary, except I don't think of what I do as complementary to orthodox medicine. I think orthodox medicine is complementary to what I do, and I think what I do is complementary to orthodox medicine.
If you get bit by a tick and you don't see a rash, and they say you should go on doxycycline within 24 hours, but there's a chance you're going to end up taking antibiotics and you never needed it, what do you do in that situation? And so I understand if you're saying you have this big ring, take antibiotics, but what if you've been bit, you pulled off the tick, they're testing it, they're not going to know for 2 weeks, you still don't have a rash, and they're saying, just to be careful, take the antibiotic, and then there's 50 nutritionists saying it's going to destroy your gut microbiome, avoid antibiotics. So what do you do in that case?
Well, first off, we don't want to take antibiotics when they're unnecessary. Antibiotics are incredible, except, yes, they have downsides, and they certainly have a significant effect on the gut microbiome. And what a lot of people don't understand is the effect on the gut microbiome is not just decreasing the number of bacteria, it decreases the diversity of the bacteria, and that decrease in diversity often never returns. Within 3 months taking an antibiotic, the number of bacteria in your gut is back to where it was before, but the diversity may never come back to where it was before. So, first off, if you look at the research on using doxycycline prophylactically for when you get a tick bite, the research is not at all impressive. And in fact, my physician, who studied with me, among other people, a wonderful physician, he actually thinks that taking antibiotics too early is a problem because if it doesn't work, then you may have developed resistance. The Borrelia organism can develop resistance to doxycycline. And yes, you can go over to amoxicillin or other things, but at a certain point, then you're going over to much more toxic substances. So, as I said before, the rash only shows up about 40% of the time. What I would say to most people, and again, you need to talk to your doctor about this, is obviously, yes, you don't want to take antibiotics when you don't need them. So it's not like you have to take the antibiotic within 2 weeks or 2 days. most of the time, if you take antibiotics within 6 to 8 weeks of getting bitten, your chances of curing, now, and I use that word lightly, curing Lyme disease, so you do not have Lyme disease, is somewhere in the high 90 percentile range, maybe 95, let's say. So I think for many people, and again, this is a conversation they need to have with their physician. For many people, you have a bit of time to see whether or not you develop. Again, there's a range of symptomology. A lot of people don't get the rash, as to whether or not you develop symptoms. If you're still not sure, and of course that gives you time to test the tick. And in most states, certainly in Pennsylvania where I am, you can send ticks to the tick lab. They'll test it and they'll tell you whether it has Borrelia, whether it has babesiosis, etc. And which is great to know, because if it doesn't have Borrelia, one of the various strains, there's several, then you don't have Lyme disease. You could have Bartonella, but so I think that the rush, again, the clinical studies, and this is what really comes down to, the clinical studies on using doxycycline for 3 days after an initial tick bite was only 7% better than people who did nothing.
Got it.
It's not impressive.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen, can you answer 2 questions? One, can you give us your thoughts on bottled water? Which is the best one? Does it matter if it's plastic in a glass bottle? Are there certain brands that are actually coming from better sources? And then 2, could you elaborate on the connection between environmental chemicals and the rising rates of autoimmune diseases?
Okay, 2 big questions, but I'm going to answer the first one as quickly and reasonably as possible. So I was even just traveling, and I always give people, I post a lot on the Smart Human on my feeds, actively being in an airport and choosing from 50 different plastic bottled waters that you might have. One of the things that you can't control in that situation is microplastics, right? We can get exposed to somewhere between 240,000 to 500,000 microplastics in one liter plastic bottle. And, this is starting to become something that people think more about. But if you're choosing a plastic bottle, and that may be the case if you have access to only, no filtered water in the airport, which is something that's become more popular, and they have these LK, carbon block filter systems, and they even say how many plastic bottles they've saved you from using, which I think is pretty interesting. Those help you help to reduce the microplastics, right? You're taking your stainless steel or glass bottle with you. You empty it before security, or else they take your bottle, which could be $50. And then you get through security and you can fill it up on the other side. That's happening. And even my hotel, believe it or not, in LA had one of the same filters actually in the hallway. So I think that's becoming more and more pervasive. But if you're choosing plastic water bottles, number one, keep in mind that most bottled water is tap water. A lot of it is tap water. There's federal laws. By the way, it's covered by the FDA, not the EPA. So we have different standards for drinking water bottles and drinking water quality than we do for the water that comes through our sink, in terms of the wastewater treatment plants. That being said, it has much lower oversight. But one of the things I do tell people to choose, again, is really having control over your choices makes a very big difference, which is what I teach and what I write about. And when you're in the airport and you're looking at all these different water bottles,